Taking an exam is never an easy task, whether it's at school, at work, or a professional certification such as a Microsoft certification. As a Microsoft certified professional for over 15 years now, I've heard many rumors, tips and tricks, and even conspiracy theories around the world of certification. Some of them are pretty realistic, some of them are a bit more far fetched, but today we are here to separate myth from reality. We actually have an expert here today to help us debunk the most common certification myths that we could find. And we have Liberty Munson, Director of Psychometrics at Microsoft, here with us. Hi, Liberty. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me back. I'm looking forward to busting some myths with you.
Oh, this will be fun. Well, Liberty, since this is the second time you're on the channel, and the last video about open book certifications had over 5,000 viewers today, and it keeps growing every day. And of course, you're famous for everybody following anything related to certification. So instead of a normal introduction, can you please tell us why you and your role as the Director of Psychometrics at Microsoft makes you an expert on this topic?
So it is my job to ensure that whatever tool or process we use to validate skills is valid and reliable. So that means, are we asking the right questions? Are we asking them in the right way? And when we talk, we're kind of doing a foray into performance kinds of stuff. Are we designing the tasks the right way? Are we scoring them the right way? My job is really to ensure that whatever the outcome is from the certification process, it has meaning, it has value, it's fair, it's reliable. So if every quality certification program or any type of credentialing program should have a psychometrician actively involved, because we're here to make sure that the experience is the right experience to ensure that you're truly qualified, you have truly earned whatever that outcome is, in this case, a certification. That means you have demonstrated the skills that you need to be successful in a job role that uses Microsoft technology solutions. So awesome. Psychometricians rule.
And you've been in this role for 15 years, if I remember correctly, right?
I am going to be
at Microsoft.
Yeah, so almost 17 years. In January, I'll be here 17 years. So just longer than you've been in MCT. So
yes.
Yeah.
Wow, awesome. Okay, let's start with our myths. The first one is, at the beginning of each exam, and for those of you watching, you have it on the screen, we get some questions about our expertise on the topic in general. So if I go to pass an Azure Administrator exam, I'll get some questions that will ask me, hey, Vlad, for how long have you been an Azure admin? And then for each one of the exam objectives, it will ask me, okay, Vlad, how do you feel about, let's say, managing virtual machine? Are you an expert, or you've never done this before? Now, the word on the street, or on the web, I guess, is that the answers you give to those questions will affect the questions on the exam. So if I say I'm an expert in everything and I have 10 years of experience in Azure, the questions I'll get on the exam will be more difficult. Now, Liberty, is this true? Can it even be true with the way that the questions are chosen? Can you shed some light on that?
I have heard this myth before, and I'm so glad to be here to bust it, because it is absolutely not true. Those questions have no bearing on the questions you'll see on the exam. That survey is there so that I can actually evaluate the cut score to make sure it's set in the right place. And so if you don't tell me the truth, I may end up setting the cut score too high as a result. So do answer those questions honestly, because it's one of the many ways that I check to make sure that we're actually setting the cut score, or I guess I should say passing score, in the right place. Because it's very much an art and a science on how we get there, because Microsoft doesn't set it arbitrarily. It's a conversation that we have with subject matter experts who help us understand, like, if you think about all the items in the item pool, are they overly difficult for the target audience? Are they too easy for the target audience? And they kind of help us balance where the cut score should be given the difficulty of the item pool. So although we scale the exam to 700, that's the cut score for across all of our exams, that doesn't mean 70%. Sometimes it does, but that's just kind of an accident that happens. But it can vary, and it does vary because sometimes our item pools end up being a little more difficult than we intended them to be for the target audience. And sometimes they're a little bit easier than we intended them to be for the target audience. So we have to leverage the where we set the cut score to make sure that it's a fair evaluation of the skills given who we are targeting the certification for. So those questions, after we launch an exam, help me go back and make sure that we actually have the cut score in the right place, because over time people get more familiar with our technologies and we have to make certain adjustments to the cut score to make sure it's still targeting the right audience we intend to earn the certification.
Okay, so if everybody says they've never done Azure before and they score in the 800-900s because in fact they have years of experience, that will make the exam more difficult for everybody in the future.
It will make the cut score, it will increase the cut score, but the difficulty of the exam stays the same. You're just less likely to pass.
Okay, wow, that's something to think about whenever you get those questions. Do not lie, because it can affect everybody else in the future. Awesome. Our second myth, and this one is also on exam questions. So the myth is that Microsoft purposely inserts fake questions just to confuse candidates and make them fail exams. This way, Microsoft can make more money.
I haven't heard this one, but this is a good one. So no, all of my questions on the exam have a purpose. Some of them aren't scored because we do have to pilot test some of the items, much like a beta. So once an exam goes live, we are constantly writing new items. And so we'll put items on the exam that aren't part of your final score so we can collect the psychometric data we need to evaluate them. But every question has a purpose. Every question is aligned to an objective. One of the things I will say is I do get feedback from people saying that that questions are they're too tricky. And I take that quite seriously because tricky is bad. We never want to measure something that is kind of a niche case, corner case that only experts would know the answer to. So if I see people saying it's tricky, I always go back to my subject matter experts and I ask them, is it tricky or is it difficult? There's a difference. It's okay for a question to be difficult because it's something more people with more expertise would potentially be able to answer. It is not okay for a question to be tricky because it's something that is so niche or corner case that very few people would know it. So my advice related to this one is I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not putting fake questions on the exam. If you think that, you have probably read more into the question than you should have. So take a step back, say, Liberty wouldn't do this to me. Reread the question and think, just take what's in the question and the logical assumptions you would make about what we tell you in the question and apply those logical assumptions and answer the question. Don't say, oh, Microsoft's trying to trick me and then try to figure it out from there because you're going to get it wrong because I'm not trying to trick you.
And I guess if you find that a question is more tricky than difficult, make sure to mark it in the comments. Whenever you have the opportunity after the exam to give comments to the team, which some of them go to you, some of them go to other teams at Microsoft, but make sure you mark it in there, because I'm sure if 80% of the people give the same feedback, that question will end up for review at some point.
Yes, absolutely great feedback.
Awesome. Okay, our third myth is that all of the questions in a Microsoft exam are worth the same amount of points.
Now, this one is interesting because it depends on how you define a question and it depends on how you define a point. So we're going to get into a little bit of psychometric conversation here. But originally, when I first started in this role many, many moons ago, all of our questions were worth 1 point, regardless of how many actions you had to take. So if you answered a multiple choice select 1, it was 1 point. If you answered a multiple choice select 3, it was 1 point. If you did a build list where you had to move 5 objects, it was 1 point. About 4 or 5, oh, it may be longer than that. I've been here a long time. Let's just say a while back, it occurred to me that maybe that wasn't the best way to get the right kind of psychometric information I needed about questions, because what I was seeing was people were skipping questions that required them to spend more time because it was only worth 1 point. So at that point, I decided that I was going to change the way we thought about scoring questions. And so every action you take in a question, you get a point. The only exception is build lists because those are super complicated in the way we have to score them. So every build list question is still only worth a point. But if you do a multiple choice select 3, you get a point for every correct answer that you select in that. So you can get 0 points, 1, 2, or 3 points, but depending on how many of those answers you select. If you do a drag and drop, and you got to drop 4 sources into 4 targets, that could be up to 4 points. Again, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So this is different from weighting. I have this conversation a lot where people are like, if it's worth 4 points, that means it's worth, it has more weight on the exam. That's not entirely true because you can get anywhere from 0 to 4 points. If it was 4 points or nothing, then yes. What happens when I have an item that's like 4 points, I just have fewer items related to that objective on the exam. So you're covering that objective in fewer questions. It's the same number of points. And unless, you could get it in 4 questions, you can get it in 1 question, but it's still 4 points for that objective, regardless of the combination of items you see.
So in the back, let's say, I'll keep using the Azure. I've been looking a lot of Azure lately, so I'll use Azure as an example. Let's say I had creating a virtual machine is weighted at 10% of the exam. Well, I know it's always flexible, but let's say it's 10%. That I might end up having 2 questions about that, or I might end up having 10 questions. But at the end of the day, it will still end up to being around 10% of the total points of the exam will be on that specific topic.
Exactly.
Okay, I did not know that. And I'll add my own question to it. So there's not 1,000 points or 100 points on the exam. Is there like a magical total number that you reach, or how does that split, that math work? Or is there where like the curve, the cut score you talked about comes in?
So practically what I try to do is put about 50 questions on an exam. And because we have this notion of polytomous scoring, which is what I just described, there could be anywhere from 50 points to say 100 points because of the combination of items and the number of points that are available. But when I think about designing an exam, I'm thinking about the fact that you have how much time you have and what I'm seeing in the data for how long it's taking to answer questions. And it's turning out to be about 50 questions per exam. Now, some questions have less some exams have less because people are spending more time on the questions, either because there's more words, which can happen, or it's more difficult content. But that's the way I look at it. And then, of course, the cut score is based on that combination of items. Like, what is the difficulty of the item set that you see? And then we figure out what the cut score should be given who we're targeting the exam for, which is why we use scaled scores. Now I'm going to go off on a little bit of tangent here, but you really want your certification programs to use scaled scores. And the reason they do that is because it makes it easier to update the cut score as needed on the back end without creating a lot of concern. If today I say the cut score is 70% and tomorrow it's 65%, because what I learned in the items I delivered you today, they were easier than the items I deliver you tomorrow. So you don't want me to apply my 70% cut score to that harder set of items, right? Yeah. So if I just say it's 700, it's a scaled score. And behind the scenes, I'm making the adjustments I need to make to ensure that given the difficulty of the items you see, the right cut score is applied. So it could be a different percent than somebody else who sits the exam the day before or day after.
Wow, so there's a lot of math and a lot of science involved in the back of it. It's not like just a simple, hey, did you get 70% right? There you go. You have 700. Wow. I knew there was some magic, as I like to call it, in the back, but I did not know it was this many factors and things behind. Wow. Okay. For our next myth, we're back on exam questions. The myth is that if you get a question wrong on the exam engine will ask you more questions around that same topic?
So that is a variation of what's known as computer adaptive testing. And Microsoft did do that at one point a long time ago, but we don't do that anymore. And the reason that we don't is because it takes a lot of psychometric data to do it accurately, and it takes a lot of items. Now, we do have the item banks actually to support it. We have a lot of items in our item banks, but we have an issue with cloud technologies. That technology is changing so fast that to get the psychometric data on some of those questions makes it incredibly difficult for me to spin up a computer adaptive model for many of our exams. So I've just right now have chosen not to do it for any, because I don't want to say, well, on this exam, it could be that experience, but on this other exam, it's some other experience. It's just super complicated to explain. But
Wow.
So there is no, how, like, the difficulty of the items you see and how you answer it doesn't impact any of the other items that you see. It does impact, it goes back to that cut score conversation we just had. So, right, because I do a lot of dynamic delivery, some of it is more of a fixed, what I call a fixed delivery, where I always know what items you're going to see based on the form, but that's a small percentage of the exam. We do a lot of dynamic stuff too, and this is one of the ways that we try to address the use of brain dumps, is because I'm constantly adding items into the item pool. I'm constantly changing them out. So in our item pool, our item banks are so big that to be able to memorize them, to know like what the new content you're going to be seeing is and all that other stuff, I'm trying to minimize the ability for someone to leverage a brain dump site to pass one of our exams. So all of that comes together to mean that computer adaptive testing doesn't work for the program the way I've designed it to address other issues that I have going on. So you get a set of questions, but how you answer one question does not impact the next question you see, or even questions that come in the future on that administration.
So this one I saw, I think it's half busted just because it was that way in the past. So there's some reality to it in the way it was in the past, but now no longer the case. That's awesome. And dealing with brain dumps, I think, will be the battle of every test designer, unfortunately. But I love that Microsoft is actively working on it. Okay, now for our sixth myth, and this one needs a bit of a setup before we go into myth, just for those who haven't taken many certifications, or those that just took fundamental certifications and didn't see all of the types of questions yet. One of the types of questions you might get on a Microsoft exam is a quick scenario and then a proposed solution. So again, I'll invent an example. You need to create a virtual machine in Azure. You ask your Google Home to do it for you. Would this solution actually help you out in your problem? Yes or no? Right? Is this a good example, Liberty?
Well, other than the fact that you said Google Home.
I know, but I wanted to give a fake one, just in case I would guess, a question. I was like, let me do something that will not be there ever. And that one clearly is a no. So I'll give you the answer to that one. Now the myth that I heard is that you always have not always, I have no idea, honestly, but most of the time you would have the same question and then multiple questions with different solutions. The myth is that there's only one solution that works. So if you answer no to everything, you get the most points possible.
Wow, that's pretty creative for people. Now I might have to rethink this a bit. But these question types are called what I call problem solution item sets. And there can be more than one correct answer in a set. So the strategy to select no to everything to maximize your points may work sometimes, but there are times when it's not going to work. The way that I believe our content development vendors who help us work with our SMEs to write our items, I believe the way they're writing these is they're coming up with a kind of a multiple choice scenario. And if you think about it, any of our multiple choice questions could lend itself to this item types, including our M2s or M3s, right? And in each delivery for each set, you see 3 questions. So if they have actually developed this using kind of the M3 item type, you choose all no, you're going to get no points in that case. But the short answer is it's not uncommon for those sets to have more than one correct answer. There's some dynamicness about the delivery. And so, it's possible that you could get one where all three of them are no. You could get one there all three of them are yes. But it's more likely the case that it's some combination of those yes/no answer choices.
Okay, so you're still better off with going with your knowledge and trying your best guess. If you have no idea, go back in your head and look for that expertise rather than just saying no to everything and crossing your fingers hoping for the best.
This is a really cool test-taking strategy that I did not know is being employed, so I'm going to keep that in mind.
Hey, when you ask it out on the internet, you hear all kinds of things. So this one, I never thought about it because for me, I don't know, those types of questions, usually I find them I don't say the easiest, because now then we're going to get less of them, so I'm not going to say that, but I find them the most fun. And the fact that you cannot go back sometimes, you're like, oh, I wish I could have went back to that one, because those types of questions, you cannot go back to them. Once you answer, it's like who wants to be a millionaire? It's always your final answer. So as soon as you click next, there is no going back. But awesome. Our next myth now has to do with beta exams. And Liberty, I know that's a bit when you're the most involved with exams in a way, when they're just getting out the door. So the myth is that exam scores during the beta phase are increased to make it easier for people who took the beta to pass.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know people were thinking that. No, because the way the beta process works is the reason you don't get a score right away is because I don't want to score you on items that we either fix significantly or we end up killing because they don't work psychometrically. So I need to collect a lot of data in order to get that. But as part of that process, that's where I have my first conversation with SMEs on where to set the cut score. And they're setting it where they want it to be when the exam is live. And I apply that same cut score to the betas candidates. So it's not easier.
Okay.
If people are, and to be perfectly honest, my passing rate in betas is always less than what it is when we go live. So I'm kind of surprised that people are thinking that's to be the case. But it's the same level of ability that you're going to have to pass when it's live is the same level of ability you're going to have to demonstrate during beta.
Okay, so that one's definitely busted. Is just maybe people that take betas feel that way, maybe because only the people who really feel like they can pass it go for it.
Well, those are the only ones who should ideally do it.
Ideally. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the mix, but we do have some rapid fire questions after. But our next myth is Microsoft Learn an extension of Microsoft marketing? I think this came because of, I think there was a big shuffle in Microsoft certifications on big products such as SharePoint, Exchange, things like that. So the rumor or the myth is that Microsoft Learn is only creating certifications on things that Microsoft marketing needs to push. So if we get a new license, it means we'll get a Microsoft certification on that new product.
So the short answer is no. We certainly get input into the certifications we're going to create. Marketing is one piece, but we actually have a whole process around how we decide what we're going to create a certification for. We have what's called a governance council, and that includes people from marketing, our product group, the business group, people from our content team, and people who know the certification space. And if people come to us and through the intake process say, hey, I want a certification for X, they have to demonstrate that there's actually a value to Microsoft to do that. And it's not because we're trying to from a marketing push that plays like a tiny role in the decision. But if you think about it, like Azure admin, that's a huge place for Microsoft to be, right? We want people who know how to use Azure, how to do the administrative tasks on it. So that one's kind of a no-brainer. But if you think about some of these emerging technologies that are coming up, it's not uncommon for us to say, hey, we think there's a need for this, but we're not sure. What is the market demand for it? Our organization's going to need a certification for this job role. And we make our best guess. We think about how many people are actually going to get certified. We think about what that means for Microsoft as a business. Because, I mean, to be honest, the reason we exist as certification is we are trying to skill people in Microsoft technologies, hoping that they adopt Microsoft technologies. I mean,
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. So we do some of that kind of ROI on whether or not it makes sense to create a certification. And sometimes we create them and we realize that that might not have been the right space for it. So I think you may have noticed that in the last month or two, we retired quite a number of certifications, but that was because we thought it would make sense to do it.
Okay.
And then we did it. And then that's not what the market needs. The market needed the learning, but they didn't really need the validation element of it. So it doesn't make sense for us to continue to maintain that kind of certification. But at the end of the day, we do market research to figure out what the job roles are that are going to use Microsoft technologies and if it makes sense for us to create a certification in that space. And marketing plays a role, right? But it's just
they're at the table. They're at the table.
Yeah, they're at the table, part of the conversation for sure. But like I said, the business group is helping us. We do a lot of market research. Unless we really feel strongly that it's worth investing in a cert, we're not going to do it. And there's a lot of voices that go into that conversation.
And I guess creating a certification is not, hey, we'll do this, it'll be out in a month.
It's expensive and time consuming.
Oh, I bet. Especially all the roles you mentioned that are involved when we talked about mix, about everybody involved from doing the job task, kind of analyzing the job task, the OD, the question pool, all of that. It must be pretty expensive.
Yeah, and it's always worth it. I love being involved in it, and I always think it's great. But I do think we have to do what's right for our customers, and will be one of the first people to say I think that's a bad idea. It's not worth the investment it's going to take to spin up a high quality certification when it feels like we're not going to have enough people interested in it or the learning. I mean, like if we create a certification, we're going to have learning, but just because we create learning doesn't mean we'll have a certification. And sometimes the investment needs to be in the learning piece.
And we've seen a lot more of that as well. I'll give an example in the modern workplace space, the employee experience specialist. We have a role for it. Technically, we have a Microsoft official course, which is the MS-080, if I remember correctly, but there's not necessarily a certification for it. So there can still be Microsoft official courses without the certification aspect for it. Awesome. Okay, before we go to the rapid fire questions, Liberty, is there anything that you've heard either in comments on the many blog posts that you do or you've seen on social media, any mix that you would like to debunk? Any rumors you've heard that did not make my list today?
There is one that I would love the opportunity to correct, and that has to do with our last conversation together, and that's open book, the open book experience that we've added to exams. So I have to admit, I regret spending the last 4 years that I've been working on this, calling it open book, because I just started applying that as I started talking about it with others and socializing it. But the word open book comes with a lot of baggage. I think a lot of people have open book experiences from college or high school where they took their exam home. They had access to any resource they wanted. They could have as much time as they wanted. And they think that that's what we've done with our exams. And that's not the case, actually. I wish I had kind of more characterized this as getting access to online documentation during the exam. And the reason I think that's a better way to think about this is because we are just trying, with this experience, with this resource, my goal was to give you access to the online documentation that you would have as you do your job. And hopefully that online documentation you're using is the stuff that Microsoft provides on Microsoft Learn. So that's what the experience is. There is no extra time. It's still a proctored experience. We're not changing the way we write our questions. And if you go into this thinking you're going to have more time, you're going to be able to look up the answer to every question, you are not going to pass because you are not going to get through the exam in the right. You're not going to be able to answer the questions, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think about this, maybe don't think about it as open book. Think about it as access to online documentation during the exam.
And I remember in our last conversation, you said, not your regret, but you didn't think it was the perfect name for it, calling it open book. And then I saw the blog post on the tech community, which of course I didn't have access to before it came public. And it said access to a new resource during the Microsoft exam. So I do think you're correct. A lot of people just read the title without going into the details, and then they just assume something. But yeah, I have yet to take an exam with documentation. I did not say it. Almost did. Almost did. I did not take an exam yet with the new experience, but I'm really looking forward to see on how it will change the way that I do the exam and how that I study. But you're right. You can't just go in there. I never do dynamics. I would not go and do a dynamic exam just because I have access to the documentation. But awesome. Is that all? Is that the only one, or that's the
big
biggest one? Okay. Before we're done, I have some rapid fire questions for you. So some smaller questions I got that I don't think they're a myth. They're just really good questions. And some of them I actually got the answer for while you explained the other mix. So first one, if there is an item with three separate questions and answers, well, I guess three separate answers, do I need to get all three answers correct to score points for the item?
No, you get credit for every correct answer you select.
Awesome. Are fundamental exams only for beginners?
No, anybody should. I think that if you want, regardless of where you are in your career, you should consider a fundamentals if you want to just either refresh yourself on kind of the basic knowledge related to our technologies. Plus, if you're well qualified, it might be a good ego boost for you to pass one of those. But they're really designed for people, entry-level people, kind of beginning in IT, and they could even be for career changers, right? They're designed for beginners, but I think that anybody who wants to demonstrate that they have the basic knowledge of our technology should be encouraged to take them.
Awesome. And personally, even if I talk to somebody that has 15 years experience, but they never did a Microsoft certification, I always tell them, start with a fundamental level certification. This way, you're less stressed. You're going to be really good at the subject. It'll give you a way to learn the interface. This way, when you do your expert level exam, you're going to be able to focus on the content, not on the interface and not on how everything works. So I always recommend starting with fundamentals wherever you are in your career. Okay, our next one. Can I know before an exam if there will be a lab in the exam or how many case studies are in the exam?
You can't know either of those. And there's the reasons why are a little different though. So for labs, we actually have a really cool delivery mechanism where we actually, not we, but the system looks to see if we're going to be able to deliver a reasonably pleasant experience if we deliver a lab. And a lot of it has to do with internet connectivity, right? And so when we first launched labs, we just kind of let them out. And we learned, especially with online proctor deliveries, is that sometimes people struggled with labs because there would be so much lag and the internet would be going in and out. And it was just a horrible experience. Yeah. So during COVID, actually, we spent a lot of time and investment in figuring out a way that we can check the internet connection and only deliver labs if we're fairly certain it is going to be a good experience for you. Okay. Now, that can change, right? So if you're taking a lab at home and suddenly your kids spin up Xbox, you might have a different problem. But in general, we can't tell you if an exam is going to have a lab because it literally depends on the moment at which you launch the exam, whether Azure's available, because sometimes it's not, and whether or not we think that this experience will be a good enough one that we feel confident we can deliver the lab successfully. With case studies, it varies because as I mentioned, I'm constantly updating exams, and we just don't have a really good way to easily communicate when I make changes to the number of cases on an exam, given the number of exams we have, given the number of publications and the number of updates I do kind of constantly. As a general rule of thumb, the way to think about cases is that for role-based, associate and expert, and for specialty, odds are pretty good you're going to get one. There are a few times when you might get two, but that's unusual. And I will add, we are working on updating the exam UI so that when you start an exam, you will see exactly how many cases you're going to have. So you'll see it on the welcome screen, and then you're going to see it right again, when you launch the exam, you'll be told, and you'll also be told about labs in both those places as well.
Okay.
And we're doing some really cool changes to the UI, and we're going to add, even once you get into the exam, you're going to be able to see how many labs you have and how many cases are coming, so you can better manage your time. That is the biggest complaint that I get about just kind of the overall UI exam experience is like, I got to the end of a section, I thought I was done with the exam, I spent all my extra time going through this, and then I clicked next and I had a case, right?
Yeah.
We're doing a bunch of stuff around the UI to help you be better informed about what's to come and what to expect on the exam. So stay tuned.
So today, no way at all, but soon you'll know when you launch your exam. So when you start your exam, before the first question, you'll know, hey, Vlad, you're going to have one lab, one case study, or maybe 2 case studies if you're special that day, and no labs. Okay, that's awesome. And again, I know we talked a bit about that in our last video as well, and I think that's an awesome investment. Okay, next question. Do questions get harder as you go through the exam?
No, a lot. The items are pretty random. So when you launch an exam, we know essentially what combination of items you're going to get, and then we randomize them. And that has to do with just protecting like security and stuff, right? So people can't look over people. Think about your test taking days in high school and you're looking over your friend's shoulder. We're randomizing them to prevent that. But no, so there is no method to the madness. It's completely random. And so unfortunately, that does mean that on occasion you actually start with the hardest question on the exam, which kind of sucks, but it's totally random.
You open up the exam and you're like, wow, okay, no idea of the first 5. And after that, it starts, okay, now I'm feeling better. Okay, but it's completely random. Okay, that's awesome. Next question, can I get answers to the questions that I got wrong?
No, people forget that certification exams are summative. They're not formative, and they're not intended to be diagnostic. So it really doesn't matter which question you answer incorrectly. It's more about that skill area and whether it's a strength or weakness, which is why we provide results at the functional group level. We provide a little bit more detail around the questions related to objectives where you're the weakest, so you can maybe focus a little bit more on your studying. But it doesn't make any sense, given the purpose of a certification, to share the exact questions you answered correctly or incorrectly.
Awesome. Last question. Does Microsoft adjust the bell curve depending on how many people passed or fail an exam? And I think you did answer that one a bit earlier.
I did. So there's no concept of a curve. The way we do this is we make sure that based on the difficulty of the items that you saw, the cut score is set appropriately. So if you see a more difficult item set, because that's the combination of items you get on one day, the percent you need to pass is going to be less than the person who maybe comes in the next day sees an easier set, right? That's why we talk, that's why psychometricians are so important when it comes to certification exams, because we know stuff like that. We're not just arbitrarily saying it's 70% without considering the difficulty of the content that you see, because that's not fair. We want to make sure that everyone is held to the same standard. And so there's a lot of psychomagic happening behind the scenes to make sure that based on the combination of items you see, you're being evaluated in a fair way.
Awesome. I've learned a lot about exams today. I didn't think that, in a way, the bell curve and the cut score were different things, but the way you explain it, I'm learning the difference. And I think I'm realizing how much work it is behind the scenes to have it, like you said, a fair and balanced way to evaluate somebody's knowledge. I think so many of us are used to our exams at school where you would have multiple choice. The teacher would come over with the answer sheet above, and if your check mark was not in there, that was it. It was too bad. But it's amazing the amount of knowledge and the science that is behind a Microsoft certification. And it's also great to see how much it changed from the things you said that were true in the past. For example, the questions being the same amount of points, or questions, the adaptive exam, where questions can get harder depending on what you answered. the possibilities are amazing and all the tools you have in a way. So that's, wow, I'm learning a lot.
Well, I am glad to help educate people around the science of creating an exam, because I do think people think that this is just like an exam they took in high school or college, and it is a very, very different process and experience.
Awesome. This is it for today, Liberty. Thank you very much for your time and expert help in uh, making it, well, in answering all of the myths that we had today. We debunked some of the most common myths. Most of them are false. Some of them had a little bit of truth to it or were true in the past. And some of them people were right on. So we really had a good mix. Thank you for everybody who answered my posts on social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Reddit. And thank you for feeding us your questions. And I hope we're able to answer all of the mix that you heard about. For those of you who missed the post, but you still have questions, please post them in the comments on YouTube. I'll try to answer many of them. I might make a list and email Liberty in a week or two, depending on how many I get. Liberty, I need your help answering those because I have no idea. And if you enjoyed this video and want to get more information about Microsoft 365, Power Platform, and of course, Microsoft certifications, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.